All right, hello everyone. I am going to take a few seconds to allow everyone to come in out of the waiting room before we begin. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hello, those of you just joining us, thank you so much. I'm going to wait just a moment until everyone that is out of the waiting room and into the webinar here. So thank you so much for joining us and your patience. All right, hello. Thank you so much. Welcome. I think that it looks like the waiting room is empty, and I'll go ahead and begin. It's 8:02. Thank you so much, and welcome to Princeton Pecha number 6. Thank you for joining the Arts Council of Princeton. Our mission, building community through the arts, was formed out of the belief that arts and art education promote cross-cultural understanding and appreciation. We at the ACP fulfill this mission by presenting a wide range of arts and arts education programming, including studio-based classes and workshops in the visual, performing, and media arts, exhibitions, performances, and free community cultural events. Our most recent venture of creative placemaking is the first Princeton Porch Fest, taking place this April 23rd from 12 to 6 in and around Princeton. This has been made possible by Princeton University, CentralJersey.com, Witherspoon Media Group, Herring Properties, Lynn and Joe Casso, Palmer Square, Philip Klippinger and Melissa Marks, Leslie Brahaney Architecture, McLean Agency, Howard Design Group, and of course, all my colleagues at the ACP who have truly rolled up their sleeves to make art work. We started this program, the Princeton Pecha, during COVID. And we saw it as a way for people to join together, a way of reaching out across the interwebs to do what the Arts Council does best, showcase local art, artists, and build community. We realized that our reach and ability to shout out these peeps was much greater on this platform, so we continued this performance virtually. Before today, our Princeton Pecha series has hosted 30 local artists curated by 5 curators. After tonight, that will be 36. I want to thank each and every artist that's participated in the past, as well as to thank the artists that have contributed their time, dedicated their lives, as you'll see here and here in their bios, dedicated their lives to the pursuit and practice of beauty, of truth, and of great art. General info tonight is this presentation is being recorded and will be released on YouTube in the coming weeks. Everyone who's registered here this evening will receive an email thanking them for participating in the Princeton Pecha series, as well as a link to that YouTube video. You can always check out our channel anytime to watch previous recordings of Princeton Pecha, as well as other performances that we've done at the Arts Council. And of course, go to the website to get any additional information, including all of the activities that we're doing during April Arts. So at the conclusion of this, we will be having a brief question and answer period. So what we're going to ask you to do is go ahead and look down at the bottom of the screen, right about there. You'll see a button that says Q&A. If you, at any time during this presentation, something pops into your mind that you want to ask one of the presenters, I ask that you type it in right then and there so that you don't dwell on that question for the rest of the series and perhaps miss some of the great presentations from the other artists, and also so that you don't forget. So go ahead and feel free to type those in as you go. And at the very end, after the last presentation is concluded, I'll open it back up to all of the questions, and we'll have a general discussion amongst the panelists. So please, like I said, feel free to post questions in the question and answer section as we go. You can post in the chat as well, but it's very difficult for me to sort of flip back and forth. So I'll generally just stick to the Q&A. So without further ado, let me begin by introducing our artists. You can see them all here on the screen with me. Hema has lived in different countries as a student and professional. She exhibited widely until she took a long hiatus to unschool her children. A new phase of self-inquiry and exploration is bursting forth via different mediums. She is currently committed to creating art every day while learning to chant, partnering with her children, encouraging her husband to heed the call of the mountains, and treasuring each moment with her elderly dog. Rashad is an award-winning author, illustrator, character designer, and educator from Lawrenceville, New Jersey. His work focuses on diversity and inclusion, fantasy, empathy, and emotional literacy for children and adults alike. He graduated from Tufts University in 2013 with degrees in anthropology and Chinese language and culture, and then went on to pursue his dreams with a master's degree in animation from the Savannah College of Art and Design. In 2017, Chapter 1 of his Carefree Like Me series won the Best Indie Book Award in the children's category. Chapter 2 on the same series won the 2019 Best Indie Illustration Award as well. He is currently at work on a graphic novel for young adults. Minako, born in Osaka, Japan, Minako studied traditional Japanese painting at Tama Art University in Tokyo. Upon graduation, Minako attended Cambridge University in England and focused on Western painting conservation. Since leaving Japan some 30 years ago, Minako has submerged herself in Western cultures in the United States and Europe. Her artwork is a cultural hybrid between Japan and the West, combining Western painting techniques learned through 20 plus years as a professional painting conservator and traditional Japanese aesthetics, which she grew up with. Michele began her quilting journey in 2006 when a friend suggested that she should take up a new hobby. She made her first quilt by hand and never looked back. Michele enjoys the process of selecting fabric, working with color value, and learning new techniques of manipulating textiles. She is a fan of New Jersey quilt artist Bisa Butler. Michele is married to artist Reinhold Ponder and is parent of 2 lovely children. She lives in Princeton, where she juggles a job as the executive director of a local nonprofit and serving on the Princeton Board of Education for a long time. Eric grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It is an area that attracted the Amish to settle and establish a farm-based community due to the rich soil. Each winter, he would watch the earth lie dormant for months. In the springtime, it was awakened for a new season of growth by teams of mule-led plows turning under the winter-crusted soils. Flocks of birds followed on the heels of the teams, feeding on the abundance of grubs and insects revealed by the plow blades. Watching this each spring, the growth that followed Eric beneath tied to the earth. He became a gardener at a very young age and worked on a farm as a volunteer for more than a decade in Lancaster. After finishing his BFA in ceramics, which makes total sense, and a BS in art education at Penn State, he moved to San Diego, where he lived for 20 years and completed an MFA in ceramics. While living in San Diego, he volunteered at a local orchard nursery that had a massive greenhouse. He ended up setting up an orchard greenhouse on his property in San Diego. Eric's formal training is in the fine arts, but he considers himself to be a self-taught botanist. Botany is the single largest influence on the work that Eric makes. Eric also is living in Princeton now. Trudy has had a 40-year continuing career as a goldsmith after graduating from the University of the Arts and Tyler School of Art. In 2016, following the death of her father and inspired by his long life, she began a series of portraits using personal papers to explore deeper into her subject's individual narratives, a path on which she continues into the present, working and showing nationally in galleries, libraries, publications, and artist residence, and museums. Without further ado, I'm going to begin showing the screen, and we're going to enjoy
So I guess these were masks, and I'm feeling like I'm a bit back in the studio after a long time with them, looking at them. There's only one mask left out of a long series I created. I'm enjoying looking at them again. These bring new ideas to me. Um, Figure drawing and painting has been a big part of my life. I enjoy it very much. It makes me feel like I can explore organic forms and look at them through materials. So watercolor informs me greatly when I do the figure, and ink. Yeah, a lot of my line work is in ink. This watercolor set is just to talk about how I love drawing in the night and looking at color in the night. It really makes me look at color values very differently, and I love this. Um, Yeah, some of these early works, I just want to show these pieces because this is what informs the later work in this presentation. These are the kinds of works I do all the time. I paint on location a lot, wherever I am. Because of my kids, I'm often stopping to drop them to classes and doing things. I just paint wherever I am. This was a digital series that I did because I really wanted to use my iPad, which made life simpler when I was stuck somewhere in the dark, maybe without enough light, or I didn't want to keep the engine running. And I would just paint and draw forms and shapes that I felt emerge. This was after a New Year hike, and I felt like the moss on the rocks really spoke to me. So I enjoyed this very much. Um, Oftentimes, actually, it's strange. My art emerges from a space akin to actually, there's this Indian artist, Madhvi Parekh, who said in one of her books that when asked, what does she think about when she's about to paint? And she's like, I'm thinking about what I'm going to cook, what I'm going to create, how am I feeling, how are my kids feeling, these kinds of questions. And this is my life. I've embraced it. I'm a mom full time. I work when I can. And if that makes me any less of a professional, I have put those thoughts aside. And I now enjoy this journey and embrace it fully. These images actually were created for a recent exhibition, but they were created a couple of years ago called Inner Landscapes. The series goes on now for the next few slides, where I actually kind of figured out that I really wanted to play with ink and watercolor because there's an immediacy and a quick feel to it that expressed my emotions rapidly so that I could go back to cooking and doing all the other things that I do. Um, so yeah. Yeah, this one actually came to me a few months ago, and I really like the interconnected web-like structures that I've drawn everywhere. They keep coming up in my work. They're kind of a new element, and I'm still playing with them. But enjoying watercolor and the way it lets me bring in new ideas and thoughts very rapidly has been very satisfying. This was another one. I call this Mrityu, and it was about death for me, but in a very almost beautiful way. And I was a bit surprised by this one. Um, I think I also think of things in a very organic way. So like this one was surprising. I was drawing this, painting this, and my son walked in and said, oh my God, is that the inside of your heart? And it was incredible that he felt that because that's exactly what I was drawing. I was drawing the inside of my heart as I felt it beat and feel. And, anyways, so I have been feeling like I'm drawing emotions. So, yep, landscapes again. This one is inspired by a night scene in Bangalore. I was visiting my parents, and something about the evening sky, yeah, kind of drew me into this. Mark making, bringing different elements together, really makes me feel happy. This particular one actually took me by surprise. I haven't thought about my childhood as much as I did with this one, but growing up in the desert and having long drives with my parents in the desert and looking at incredible sunsets with them and remembering all kinds of experiences as a child when you're so attuned to things, so aware. This one actually is called The Monk Started to Chant, and it's because I recently have been listening to a lot of Gregorian chants. I love them. I also do a lot of Indian chants, and I just love them. There's something very meditative about it that I needed in my life, and this image kind of captured that. This painting is called There Has Always Been Violence, and was sort of a recent one when the whole Ukraine thing started. And I was also destroyed inside, but also at the same time feeling like it's always been with us, this whole cycle of violence. So there's that amount of darkness coming in. I wanted to show this because this is leading up to a new series that's not shown in this presentation about compost. I just love the mess in nature. It just draws me in. And these are inspired by different people's photographs of just composting elements. So I'm doing a new series. It's up on my Instagram. During the pandemic, cooking was hard. It was a lot of us, a lot of cooking, a lot of cleaning, a lot of, visceral stuff going into the pantry. And I started to think about emotions being trapped in our pantries and bottles and jars. And I just felt like, there's so much of me that I was handing plates of food saying, here you go, versus being like, here you go, here's some nice food for somebody, So I kind of had to really think about my emotions as I presented food. So I started to paint about, pickled emotions and, curried feelings and, stuff like that. Also partially inspired by a beautiful passage written by Salman Rushdie in, I think it was Satanic Verses. He speaks about, or Midnight's Children, I'm sorry, when he speaks about serving or stirring your angst into the chutney. This is an image of a bottle that you can just about make out bursting forth. Just wanting to let out my feelings.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rashad Malik Davis. And again, I wanted to thank Adam Welch and the Arts Council of Princeton for holding this space for us all to gather tonight. So today's my birthday, whoop, whoop. So I'm feeling very excited to be sharing this moment with you all. But because I write books and I'm obsessed with storytelling, what I'm here to do today is to tell you a story and to specifically talk about how we all have the capability for great magic. You'll find the thread of magic running through all of my work, but this story is ultimately of how I decided to become an artist and devote my life to my craft, and how it all began with an idea, a pen, and a sticky note. So these first few images are images from my children's picture book entitled Carefree Like Me. Two best friends based on me and my best friend Nina get stuck in a mystical world where they meet 7 different heroes. Each hero represents a different out of balance emotion and a different ancient culture, and the kids learn that they must use their empathy and emotional intelligence in order to get back home. The story itself is full of magic, but I'd like to say that my journey has been full of magic as well. So in 2016, I had just ended a really dark chapter in my life that left me facing a crossroads. I was heartbroken, I had my self-esteem shattered, and just generally knew that I had the option of either remaining a victim, or choosing to B, empower myself and go after my dreams. But I didn't have the strength even to choose. But what came to me in the depths of my sadness one day were the letters SCAD. It turned out that that was the #3 animation school in the US at the time. I felt that I should apply, but I was too terrified, to be honest with you. And then one night I get an extra push. I had a very vivid dream. I dreamt that a tower had come crashing down, and the smoke and debris rushed towards me. In the midst of that smoke, I saw the number 1557. So I had no personal connection to the number or the year or anything, but I, like any rational person, decided to Google it. The number related to study, higher learning, and education, and stated an opportunity has presented itself that I could not refuse, and it may not come again. So, whoa, deep. I decided in that moment that that was no coincidence, accident, or mistake. I felt I was being guided to a path that was ultimately not only healing for myself, but for others as well. I decided to make that first step. I applied to SCAD, and miraculously, with no formal training, I got into the animation master's degree program, which was like, whew, okay, did it. I was ecstatic. I packed my car, my mother and my aunt went down with me. I found an apartment in literally a day, and I was set and poised to pursue a new path. But in the midst of my study, however, I felt pulled once again, this very crazy pull. I'd gone home for winter break, and while I was sitting on the couch, 3 words popped into my mind's eye: adventure, kids, magic. Okay, what is this? What is this? I decided that I knew I had a story that needed to be shared and ran upstairs with my idea. my sticky note, and my pen to form a very loose synopsis, leaving my very confused mother and best friend behind. I came home that summer, wrote the whole first book in 3 months and illustrated it in 6. I knew intuitively that this book was the launch pad for something far greater than itself and more than I could understand. The book immediately took off. I ended up on live TV with News 12 New Jersey, ended up in the Lawrence Gazette, was on radio, podcast, and the best part was that I began to teach. I then submitted my story on a whim to an independent book award company while I was in Saudi Arabia. So it was like 1 minute before midnight in the US. I was like, oh my God, let me do it, let me send it. Called the Best Indie Book Award. And it won for the children's category, which absolutely blew me away. I didn't think it was possible. And for the second book, the awards contacted me and told me that I should submit. I ended up winning in a tie with a really brilliant illustrator. So that was a huge ego boost for me. Then 2 years ago, I knew that my journey had to expand. I was ready to go the traditional publishing route. I knew that I needed an agent, and once again, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I said, my goal this year is to find an agent. For context, people will sometimes search months and years for a literary agent. But a month after I wrote that sticky note, a friend reached out advising that an agent saw my work and wanted to speak to me about representing me. How does that happen? I'm now submitting a graphic novel for young adults about a modern gay teen who finds out that he's the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess who broke a vow with a vengeful goddess. And this goddess is now after her pound of flesh from him. So this story comes from my deep fascination with history, particularly ancient to contemporary African history, but also my desire to tell nuanced stories featuring the interactions, or the intersection, I should say, of Black and queer identity. All of my stories come from a place of authenticity and love and a desire to reach back to a child who never had their story told. So I share this story with you as encouragement to take that risk. Today, I got news that I'm being honored as one of 3 people at the Grand Theater in Williamstown for connecting and sharing with the community. So it's very incredible and really exciting. But I share this with you today to tell you to do that thing that brings you joy. Listen to that voice that says that you are capable and deserving of love in all of your wildest dreams. We are all capable of great magic beyond our wildest dreams. And I just say you need an idea, a pen, and a sticky note. Thank you very much. Oh, and this is the Vengeful Goddess segment. So I'm very excited to share this and get this out into the world. And I think that may be the last image, maybe. Oh, this one, yes, this last one. So this is actually a page from the graphic novel itself. This is from one of the first scenes and how the students and the main character Jabari at the bottom with the afro learns that he is now the reincarnation of this goddess. So very exciting. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Today, I'm going to talk about how I have developed my artistic style, which has a lot to do with my ethnic and professional background and what they use for painting material and how I use them. Like I mentioned in my bio, my painting skills are largely coming from my experiences of more than 20 years as a painting conservator. I studied a lot of chemistry and physics in all the fine art and learned how to recreate certain effects and appearances in my own art. So another element in my art is like a Japanese-ness. So here you can see my ethnic roots are strongly showing. I painted a Japanese motif on the roosters' bodies, and I also painted these on Japanese newspaper in a collage-like technique, which we'll explain to you later. From here, I'd like to show you some of my new marine paintings. I started this series 2 years ago when COVID became a serious threat in the US. I started wanting to paint something simple, primitive, yet energetic and joyful to inspire people in difficult circumstances. Has anyone seen my Octopus Teacher on Netflix? It's a beautiful documentary film. And that film inspires me to paint these. And one of the things that I pay attention to while painting is negative space. I leave quite large amount of space empty around the subject so that the viewer can use their imagination to decide what's going on in that empty space. So in a way, although I start a painting, the viewer can finish it. Another important aspect of my painting is playfulness. I decided to use this simple horizontal format so that I can emphasize how long and how odd and this office is. I want to make it look like zoological specimen of office. Likewise, here I left space empty to emphasize how small and poetic this sea slug looks. I think composition is a very important element in art. As compositions can give the viewer very strong first impressions, I believe composition is a statement. So now I'll be quiet for next 3 slides. So I want you to pay attention, particularly to compositions and negative space around the subjects. Please enjoy. And meanwhile, I can drink water. So here I'm back to talk, my collage technique. So these are what they use: silver leaf, acrylic paint, brush, canvas or panel. And on the right-hand side, I'm holding a sandpaper block to abrade the surface to give an antique effect on this gilded panel. On the left-hand side, I'm using acrylic paint to draw, and I cut it out in shape and I glue it to that gilded surface with acrylic medium and using a sponge brush. And after it's dry, I use a roller to apply kind of darkened color, like a yellow ochre color, to the whole surface, which gives the painting like a patina-like effect before coloring in. And on the right-hand side, it's finished product. Again, I use acrylic paint. I like that material because it's so versatile. So from here, I'd like to show you different type of paintings and drawings. I like combining 2 different elements in one composition, that is movement and stillness. Like here, the praying mantis is movement and the zucchinis are stillness. By combining these opposite elements, I try to create contrast and the story in a painting. So here in a similar way, the frog is being still and the flight is moving. And I'm hoping that the viewer can decide what will happen to the fly and can finish the story in their imagination. When I need a break from painting in full colors, I often draw black and white pieces like this on paper. I like drawing black and white as I can work very fast. The fact that I don't have to mix paint to create certain colors in a palette can save me time, and I can focus on creating interesting compositions. Very often for this kind of drawing, I spend more time on thinking about compositions than actual execution of it as a result. And I've been always working from home. I never had a studio separately located. I raised 2 kids, and staying home for them was a very important part of my life. And I'm glad that I did that. But now that my kids are grown and gone, I live with my cat, Lima, which makes my life really peaceful and I can focus on painting. So to close, I want to thank you all for listening. And if you like my art, please visit my Instagram page as I regularly post new paintings and other information, such as announcements of my exhibitions and workshops. If you don't do Instagram, please Google me. You'll find my website there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michele Tuck-Ponder, and I am very appreciative of being here with you this evening. Most people in Princeton know me as an elected official or a nonprofit executive, but on social media and in certain circles, my claim to fame is that I am a quilter. As Adam stated earlier, my quilting life began in 2006 when a friend decided that we needed a hobby. I already knew how to sew, having learned to construct simple items such as aprons and potholders in the home economics class at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School in Teaneck, New Jersey. Yes, I'm that old. I went a few years without sewing, but picked it up again after law school and when I started working on Capitol Hill. The pay was very low. We used to call the Hill the last plantation, but we were expected to dress professionally. I borrowed a sewing machine and taught myself garment sewing. My red, pink, and electric green tailored suits were always attention grabbers in a sea of conservative business suits. When I finally found a decent paying job, I quit sewing my own clothes, and I didn't sew on a machine again until I discovered quilting. My first quilt was pieced and quilted entirely by hand as a gift for my husband. I learned to quilt from a book called Make Your First Quilt, probably written for a 12-year-old. The pattern was called Around the World, and I made it using batik fabric, which is created by using wax resist dyeing on whole cloth. It was a decent job if you didn't look too closely. But I was surprised by my family's response to the quilt. They fought over it, hiding it from each other and wrapping themselves in the quilt until it literally fell apart. I realized pretty quickly that I was onto something. The actual construction of a quilt is pretty simple. A quilt has 3 layers. The top, which can be a variety of fabrics pieced into a design. The middle, which is called batting and made from materials ranging from bamboo to cotton to polyester. And the backing, which can be one whole cloth or a design piece using leftover fabric from the top. Within those broad parameters, there's a shocking volume of quilt patterns, fabrics, and techniques. Quilting has really exploded on social media and makes it possible to collaborate with quilters from around the world. I recently took a class with a teacher from Israel. My quilting style, as you might see, is modern. Modern quilts are functional, include bold colors, and are inspired by modern design. In contrast, traditional quilts rely on a grid of regularly repeating designs, symmetry, sashing, or borders. Some feature complicated patchwork and simple quilting. Making the same block over and over bores me to tears, so I don't do it. Quilting also has deep roots in African American culture. Enslaved people created quilts from tiny bits of cloth to keep their families warm. Legend has it that quilts were also used to guide enslaved people to routes and safe houses on the Underground Railroad. Many cultures also share a rich quilting tradition. But most importantly, across cultures, it was an opportunity for women to get together, to socialize, and share meals and gain a respite from the monotony and solitude of their lives. That's my mom. She's actually turned sideways, but the portrait is supposed to be of her right side up. But unlike a delicious home-cooked meal or handmade greeting card, a quilt provides physical and emotional warmth. It's a symbol of caring and security. So it's very rare for me to sell a quilt. I almost always give them away as gifts because for me, quilting is a spiritual endeavor. A quilter named Joan McMahon, who's a professor at Towson State University, put it this way: quilting helps us look at the way we learn about ourselves and our values. It connects us with others and the world around us. It is how I find meaning and purpose in life. Quilting explained a lot to me about the human spirit, our behaviors, and our beliefs. In explaining the truths about quilting, I also discovered truths about being human. So I create quilts for people and causes that I care deeply about. I quilt for people with cancer. I quilt to celebrate marriages, anniversaries, birthdays, and graduations. I quilt when someone loses a loved one. I quilt for people with Alzheimer's. I quilt to raise money for charity, such as my church or the Girl Scouts. The more I quilt, the more I need to quilt. It brings me peace and joy, and hopefully comfort and happiness to others. My quilts are never perfect, but neither am I. As a quilt artist, I'm always learning new techniques and skills. I recently completed a quilt portrait of my mom, which I think I pointed out to you a little earlier. And that is one of the works that I am most proud of. I'm pleased and honored to have participated in Princeton Pecha and appreciate the opportunity to share my gifts. This last quilt includes Adinkra symbols from a village in Africa. And again, my favorite quilts are African fabric. And this is a baby quilt, a floor quilt for a small child who can start to see the colors and beauty of Africa in the fabrics that I put together. So thank you. And this is finally one, I think it was my husband's favorite one because it hung on the wall for a very long time. Again, a combination of fabrics, whatever moves me, and it's usually color and pattern.
Wonderful work, Michelle, and beautifully said. The influence of our parents is pretty profound, and I think it's a fairly common thread for artists. For me, it was a pretty powerful thing. On the bottom right, I'm out in the garden with my dad in Georgia, and my brothers and sisters would often find their way to other things, and I would be in the garden till the end of the day, and my mom would walk me around and show me the way that the buds were changing on trees, or point out the way that bulbs were pushing through the soil and breaking the crust. And so each day I kind of got tuned into changes in the natural world that really heightened my sense of my surroundings. And so this is a few images from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. It's an unbelievably rich farmland and home to the Amish that spend a tremendous amount of their life working the land. And I was able to work in those communities and volunteer. And bird nests have been a huge influence for me as well. This is in a banana leaf in my garden in San Diego. And I've always liked the space that is there when the bird has gone somewhere else. The space sort of calls back to whatever bird has sort of created that, in the same way that I've always been drawn to the work of Andy Goldsworthy. This is called an after image, where he just laid down right before a snowstorm and then was able to kind of step out of frame. And again, that same idea of that space kind of calling back to something that used to be there is something that kind of pulls me over and over again. So here's some work that kind of ties in that. On the top left is a grinding stone that just sort of collected this pool of water and kind of trying to capture some of that feeling in the ceramic forms that I make. So that there's not really ever supposed to be another cup there, that's supposed to be a space that calls to the absence of something that could have been there. The bases are coated with rubber, but it's mostly ceramic. Sometimes it feels like 20 seconds is longer than 20 seconds. There we go. This is the first cup that I made that was inspired by bamboo. And so in my studio in San Diego, I had about 20 different species of bamboo growing outside my studio window. So as I sat and threw on the wheel, I would look at this. And I think that those things that you look at on a daily basis, they tend to find their way into your work. And so this is a more advanced sort of evolution of that same idea. You can see the bamboo pattern as it bursts out of the ground on the top, and then taking that and incorporating that pattern, but now coming back from the inside and distorting it and adding volume. So it's not, the work I make is not meant to look like bamboo and make someone think of bamboo, but I'm incorporating things that I think are important to me. And so this is the first time I had an orchid greenhouse, and I traded an old kiln I had to somebody who wanted to start ceramics, and he had a huge orchid nursery, and this was an old greenhouse. And so we traded knowledge and were able to answer questions for each other. And so these are just some of the orchids from that greenhouse that I was able to bloom. But over time, working at his greenhouse, I would work for just divisions of plants instead of working for pay. And so my collection would just increase, and looking at those forms on a daily basis, I see that same type of quality showing up in my work. So in the top, I'm using a Paphiopedilum orchid, and I specifically choose that over something like a rose because I feel like a rose is so recognizable and has a lot of interpretation that go right along with it. But in this, the people don't necessarily see that that's an orchid. And I really enjoy how people bring their own life experience to interpreting the work. So I've asked people, and I get about 15 different responses for what they think that image is. And so on the left, it's a decal that I've created, an adhesive decal, and then it's sandblasted and then removed. And so you get a gray background for the black. And then just combining sort of the voluptuous sort of form of the hood of the orchid, and then taking the patterning from the top and pulling that down. So again, it's not something where I would ever think that someone would look at this work and say, wow, that looks like such and such an orchid. That's not my intention. I want to make work that's honest, that comes from a place that is important to me. But I enjoy the fact that people will see different things when they look at it. So this is another orchid in a much more sort of a regular pattern that shows up on the work in the bottom, and then bringing back that sort of parallel line quality, and all those lines are sort of cut to fit the forms that you see. Here's an easier one to sort of a little bit bigger to kind of understand, but it's a tremendous amount of work to make this. Each one of the lines fit the form and to cut them with an X-Acto, and it's work that's very, very tedious that I don't necessarily look forward to, but I love the product. And this is sort of taking the two ideas that I mentioned, this idea of nesting, and then also bringing that bamboo patterning into this. And I think that's always interesting in the studio when you see connections to work maybe that was from a year before, and you can kind of bring that forward, and then taking those ideas of the parallel lines from the hood of that orchid, and then carving them this time in the image on the top, and playing with color. I work in black and white a lot, primarily because I deal with color blindness, and if I just keep it black and white, I don't have the struggle of trying to communicate with color. And now I teach full-time at Princeton Day School, and I'm lucky enough to also have the job. I manage the brand new 42-foot long school greenhouse. So I have a huge amount of botanical influence that I can bring into my work on a daily basis in this amazing facility. And the next slide is a number of plants that are from the greenhouse here at my school. And a lot of the forms of carnivorous plants I just find to be really amazing. The second one down on the left is a pitcher plant before it's opened. And I can see forms and ceramic forms in these things.
Hi. Everyone has a story, and all artists are storytellers. My paper collage work began in 2016 because I wanted to remember my father's story after he died at age 96. He was a mathematician who was obsessive about words and paper, and in fact, he never threw out a piece of paper. And so I had his whole life gathered in a pile of documents. I decided to try to use his papers to create a portrait, which was aptly named In His Own Words. And it was a real eureka moment for me, because it was immediately apparent to me that these personal materials gave life to a much broader picture as words, dates, and important documents blended to fill in the gaps of the narrative. His long life gave me lots of opportunity to consider expanding this collage exploration. And the titles too took on a life of their own as I tried to connect them. For example, this one made out of a supermarket circular was titled For a Limited Time. And creating the images was like solving a puzzle. And because I'm a goldsmith by training, the use of hand tools and small meticulous work came naturally. The hardest part was getting up the nerve to cut original documents. But once I started, I realized they were really necessary components to reveal the layers beneath the surface. And so I did it. He was a great subject because I too hoarded many personal and family papers. I continued the concept by making family portraits. And the more I looked through the papers I'd saved, the more I realized that so many aspects of my family's life were revealed, from personal history, cultural identity, interests, travel, troubles, the passage of time, and so on. And it inspired me to look deeper into each portrait to try to render a new or a different view. My subjects' lives were truly written all over their faces. By this time, I'd posted a few pictures and I was receiving a lot of interest. I took on my first commission of a musician whose friend supplied me with her music to use. A series of commissions followed this, each with their own challenges and unique qualities. I was given boxes full of papers and documents to sort through and decide how best to portray the essence of the subject. Some of the papers actually had real intrinsic or historical value, so I insisted on free rein in cutting anything they gave to me. To my surprise, it didn't scare anyone away, and so cut away I did. But as any portrait artist knows, it's very tricky to capture someone in a portrait. But using these papers seemed to reveal new perspectives and depict them in a deeper way. I start from a photograph, and if I haven't taken it myself, I ask for many options to find one that intrigues me enough to want to know more. The portraits are dense and quiet and require close inspection. I was particularly happy to see my work displayed with magnifying glasses in a museum show in 2019. Sometimes I look for a non-traditional view, such as the portrait of a wonderful driver I had in Berlin, and the view from my back seat that's coming up soon. This one included lots of historical documents that were a surprise to me as I delved into all of the papers that were given from the family. I think my favorite comment at this time was in a show where a man came up to me and said, "I'd love to see what the inside of your head looks like." And I said, "There it is." I started to look inward at this time and an evolution of self-portraits emerged. Each piece depicted a particular moment in time, and I tried to use papers that were important to me in that moment. This allowed me to examine who I thought I was at that time and where I thought I was going. I experimented with positive and negative spaces and colors to play with the mood. I even embossed some words into the pictures. This portrait was from the day before the 2016 election when I was so full of hope, and it's rendered in all the materials I needed to distract myself from the terrible letdown in the weeks that followed it. 2020, of course, brought its own particular miseries, and my artwork began to reflect the physical, political, and social upheaval all around. This piece is inspired by the vice presidential debate, which gave me a new appreciation for flies, and it's entitled Field Guide to Topical Flies, made from all the papers on my workbench the night that I watched the debate. The advent of Zoom allowed me to connect to the outside world during the pandemic, and during a lecture by the architect Sir David Ajayi, I photographed his image on my computer and then rendered it in pictures of historical building materials. Responding later that summer to the death of George Floyd, I wrote a sort of spontaneous essay about breathing in the form of a trachea, where the thyroid was a badge of the Minneapolis Police Department, and the bronchi led to maps of all the cities that were engaged in protests. This portrait of my son includes his Jewish-Japanese roots, and it's called The Other Brother. Around 2017, I started traveling a lot more than I had in previous years. And using all the papers I collected on these trips, I decided to make a travelogue in the shape of a bird native to where I'd visited. This became a secondary preoccupation. And as I researched birds, I also started to read the stories of extinct species. I did a short series of extinct birds depicted in maps and papers related to their demise. This is the extinct passenger pigeon entitled Returned to Sender. Birds continue to fascinate me. Since 2016, my work's been shown in galleries and museums in 38 group and solo exhibitions. And last year I completed a wonderful community residence at Nassau Presbyterian Church, making a giant dove from the congregation's papers. But I still haven't lost the initial excitement I had from the first portrait, when all those words and colors came together to form a bigger meaning. Thanks for listening.
Whoa. All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Have you ever stopped to consider the depth and richness of the people we see and don't know? If this presentation tonight doesn't convince you of the transformative power of art and the enlargement of our worldview, I do not know what will. I want to, before we begin the question and answer period, I want to be sure that you all take a look at the names and the addresses, websites or Instagram handles or email addresses of the artists that have donated their time and given us tonight the sort of the insight into their ethos. I wish you would reach out to them, thank them for joining us tonight, and also, you know, and tell them how much you enjoyed it. Tell them how much you enjoy their work, and of course, there's nothing like commission or purchasing a work of art. I'm shameless plug for these artists who have really done a fantastic job tonight. I will leave this shared screen section now. And as we prepare to join into a conversation, I am asking everyone to go ahead and type their questions into the chat, and I'm going to pull some of the questions up and go ahead and ask a few of them. I will mention in the interim while I weed through these, please feel free to continue to ask questions, but I will say that comments of beautiful, amazing work, everyone, and hello comes to each and every one of you. And I'm going to start with a question from one of our audience members to specifically Michele. Do you use quilts as wall hangings?
I do. I absolutely use quilts as wall hangings because big quilts take a long time. And so when I give someone a smaller quilt, for example, I do word quilts, and I'll make letters and sayings, and those are usually meant to be hung. The pin cushion quilt that you saw is a wall hanging. The portrait of my mom is a wall hanging. So I'm trying to learn how to make smaller quilts as opposed to everything being a lap quilt or a bed quilt.
It's often difficult because when you're working large, right, it's an image that's so engrossing. Not only are you engrossed in producing it, but you want the viewer to have that full experience. So that's very lovely. Thank you so much. Hema, please tell us a little bit more about your series, Pantry of Feelings. Did it help you understand your feelings better? What are you thinking about while you are painting?
Oh, it did help me process my emotions and maybe become more aware of how I was serving food. It might sound like a really simple thing, but as a mom serving food each day and nurturing on different levels, it really made me aware of what I was processing and whether I needed a break and whether it was okay to just eat, I don't know, bread and butter. It was okay. I had to really think about what I was doing in my kitchen. I do enjoy cooking, and it's a big part of my life. But I also felt pressure, and I think just processing emotions during the pandemic itself was like you could no longer just push things under a carpet. You just kind of had to. Everything was out there. It was like we were all living with each other. We were all in each other's faces, and it was like damn, I have to really deal with these emotions now. I just can't like hide them anymore. So I did it, and it was fun. It was really great. It was also a time of great transformation in our home, and my family very lovingly helped me create a studio in my basement. These kinds of things happen because of processing those emotions. And I adore getting pictures of pantries from people. I just love it. There's something about the connection between food, ingredients, putting them all together. And yeah, I feel like it's a metaphor for so many things. So yes, I'm sorry, there was a question, a second part to that question.
The second part of the question really was, did it help you understand your feelings better? And
Yeah.
what were you thinking while you were painting? I think you did, you
I
sort of,
think I answered it.
yeah, you answered everything in a cumulative sort of manner. So really quickly, I will just say, Michelle, my mother had that, well, not mine, sorry. One of the comments was, my mother had the same pin cushions. Now I treasure it. So such a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. One question that I have here specifically geared towards Michele and Trudy. In the process of making arts of your parents' image, did you discover anything about your parent that had previously gone unnoticed? So we'll start with Michele and then head over to Trudy.
I think that I didn't realize how much I looked like my mom. I think in working with the fine lines and pieces of her face and the shape of her nose, because I would have said my sister really looked like my mom, that I didn't really look like my mom, but it turns out I really do. So that is true. But I'm looking at Trudy's work and I'm just like, I'm blown away. It is absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that she uses, paper like she has, it's not like she can go to a fabric store and pick out value. I mean, she's got to actually make that happen. I'm blown away.
Thanks, Michele.
So Trudy, in the process of making these images of your father in this particular case, did you discover anything about him that had previously gone unnoticed?
Yeah, I really had reams of papers covering his whole life. And one of the early portraits I showed was of him in an army uniform. He was in World War II. He was in Europe for 4 years, got wounded and had a lot of issues coming back as a veteran, getting a job, getting what was required from the VA. And it was all documented. And it was what led me to want to portray him in that piece. There was a lot. There were family histories, and it's really amazing when you start to delve into papers that look like just documents, how the story reveals itself. And so I found out a lot about my family that way. And also that my children looked a lot more like him than I could have imagined.
Excellent. And I do want to, in front of all of our attendants here, to express my deepest apologies to Michele for inadvertently flipping the canvas on the side for the portrait of your mother. I'm sorry if that certainly disrupted your presentation. And I hope people had to pay closer attention to the image itself to reconceptualize it. But I think this question, even though it was directed specifically to Michele and Trudy, I do think that this question about the relationship to in the process of making art, right? How do we learn a little bit more about, say, our connections to our past, our connections to our parents, our connections to the sort of the issue at hand? And I think that everyone here, whether it be Minako or Rashad or Eric, and I think let's address the questions to these three. How do you see how your, and I'm just throwing this out there, you answer it the way you want. Say, Eric, how do you see the connection of your, as I mentioned during your the reading of your bio, your connection to ceramics and sort of the prima materia, the initial earth, relating back to your father in some particular way and those experiences you had on the farm in Georgia, I believe it was. and also sort of Rashad, and sort of the work that you're doing now, and I hope you can remember these questions when I get back to you. Rashad, the work that you're doing now, reaching back to your experiences as you relate to sort of hoping that children have a sort of an experience of their childhood. How does the work that you're working through now help you work through your own experience in your childhood? And Minako, how does the work that you're working through now express and relate you back to what you called your homeland, right? To Japan that you left over 30 years ago. So if you can remember those questions, though maybe it's not relevant, let's go to Eric, Rashad, and then Minako to address that, or anything that you feel worthy of expressing.
Sure. I'll actually start with you talked about the connection to the earth and to working with clay. And I mean, it's a very physical, they're both very physical tasks. And, when I was in middle school, I feel like I did not see myself as much of an artist. And I would look at other people's work with a paintbrush or a pencil. And I just was the student that wished I could do that. And so it was when I got to high school and I had a teacher who introduced me to clay that sort of took me back to, working in the earth. And it was just very, very physical. And right away, I knew that this was the way that I was going to be able to express myself. I wasn't very good at it in the beginning, but I just was very determined. I mean, I saw my teacher doing this and I thought, I enjoy this, having clay in my hands or having wood in my hands is so much different than a pencil or a paintbrush, which to this day I still don't consider myself to have that much skill with. But I talk about that with my students in the classroom all the time, that you can't decide that you're not artistic if you haven't tried all the different ways of expressing yourself.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Rashad, if you
Yeah,
can remember that thread of a question I threw out there.
I do. So to the question of my work in childhood, it's really interesting. The journey into art has been largely a spiritual one for me, and I feel like with my work with children's books and young adult graphic novels, those were two very difficult times in my life for me, because I struggled with intersectionality, with the intersection of my identities. I struggled with being a Black man, right, which comes with all sorts of violence and joys as well, but there are particular struggles that I faced. And then on top of that, I had to figure out how to balance being gay. And so I would often go to my Black community looking for love and acceptance for my full self and didn't get it. And then I would go outside of my community and wouldn't get the acceptance because I was Black. So I wanted to create these books and my graphic novels as a means of really healing myself unintentionally. It was healing my inner child. It was healing my inner teenager that was so desperately looking for a space to feel accepted. But as soon as I got out into the world and started reading my books to children, I realized that kids were saying like, do you have a book about kids from Guatemala? Do you have a book about kids from anywhere in the world? And I realized that even if they're not expressing it, kids want to see themselves as themselves fully. And so, this work is deeply spiritual, but it's also healing for myself. And as I'm reaching out to children and young adults, realizing that it's healing for them too.
And to rephrase what you said, really to be able to look at these kids, to look out into somebody else, to see in somebody else what it is that they feel and see within themselves. I think that's, a lot of what the children's books, are capable of accomplishing. But that, and that's all art, right? That's what everyone here in this room sort of does and is able to do, right? The sort of the ability of art to have this transformative power for both the artist and in the making of it, and in the viewer of experiencing it. So thank you very much, Rashad. And to keep things moving along, Minako, you don't remember my question, but that's okay. Did you want to talk a little bit about the idea of your artwork and the expression of your artwork and the the creation of your artwork now, in explaining in your sort of, as I think you referred to as your the relationship of your Japanness, I think you used, to having left that homeland 30 years ago.
Yeah, the identity is very difficult issue. You know, for me, like, where are you from is the most difficult question to answer, because I was born in Osaka in Japan, but I was living in London, Cambridge, and I went to Chicago, and I went to Moscow, and when I'm here. So including everything, you know, in answer is totally impossible. And identity is something that you don't create. Actually, you remove this element from you, this element from that. Like I learned painting conservation in Western paintings, so I know lots about Western art. But going through this search for identity, you remove the layer by layer. Like okay, I know this part element of Western art is very beautiful, but it's not for me. And I can do oil painting, it's not for me. And everything is left afterwards, it's your identity. And I just realized that I'm Japanese. And when I was in Japan, when people ask me my identity, Japaneseness is the last thing that it came to my mind. I was a girl, and I was like, I love art and such, but like, it's like a fish in a fish tank, water, like asking the fish, so how is the water today? Like a fish doesn't realize it's in the water. So like for me, that was Japaneseness.
Thank you so much. So 2 quick questions for Trudy. One is of a technical nature. Well, they're both of a technical nature. How do you feel about actually cutting these documents? And then on the side note of that is, what type of glue do you use? And do you pass, do you, I guess, glue them one by one as you create the portrait, or do you place all the pieces before gluing everything together?
I use glue sticks. They're archival, and they're the easiest to use. I tried all kinds of glues and realized that the glues that were liquid were just too difficult for the very, very tiny pieces. And I use tweezers and hand tools to work with. It's interesting, as this process developed, I kind of map out, I look at all of the material, I select the material I want to use, and I kind of map out sections and cut them out, and maybe I'll glue them down, and then it's this crazy intuitive process that takes over. I just start cutting. I see what I need and I just start cutting, and it's a very sort of Zen thing. It just evolves, and I'm somebody who has been trained to sit for long periods of time concentrating, and so it doesn't bother me to do that. And I'll cut tiny pieces of paper and just keep placing. Often I'll be cutting out eyelashes and pasting them on, and everything is cut paper. It's all, none of it's drawn in except for that George Floyd piece. Everything else basically is a piece of cut paper that's glued down.
Excellent.
Did I answer all of those questions?
Yeah, I think that was perfect. So to a person who's who I much admire, and who is the great artistic director of the Arts Council of Princeton, Maria Evans, wrote Amazing Group. And I think that means a lot coming from Maria. Also, I would be remiss if I did not echo some of the comments that were coming in the chat here, and that was mentioned by Rashad. Happiest of birthdays to Rashad, who gave, who has decided to include us in his birthday celebration. And Michelle, who also has just recently celebrated, just a day or so ago, has celebrated a birthday what a great way to celebrate another year of life together with people who you don't know, who you're getting to know. And, this glorious group of people are here to listen to us all. So just really, really, truly fantastic. Eileen has asked a question, a comment first. Fantastic, everyone, which is great to hear. Thank you, Eileen. And to Michele, can you describe how you made the portrait of your mother? Is it painted or is it all fabric?
It's all fabric, and it is layered, layers of fabric. And so one of the challenges is that you have to select the appropriate values so that the contrast work with the shading and light reflecting off of the face in the portrait. And so there are a couple of small places where I touched up with a pen, the highlights in her eyes. I couldn't cut out those little tiny circles out of fabric. And I whitened her teeth a little bit because my cutting wasn't as fine as it should have been, but it's 99% fabric.
Excellent, truly amazing. So thank you so much. Next question would be directed towards Eric. Love how the organic markings or shapes extend from the plants to your ceramics. Were the photos you shared a formal series, or were they just presented so we could understand the environment, a childhood background for your ceramics? I guess, are they a work of art in and of themselves? Have you displayed them as such?
I have not. I think it's just, Rashad talked about, trying to tell a story. So I think, a lot of what we're all trying to do is to tell the story. And for me to put up 20 images of just my work, I feel like would not truly tell the story, to kind of give, especially in less than 7 minutes, give people a kind of a window into why we do what we do. And so I think that's part of why I think you saw, some version of that from many of us. So I do like to try and document the the growth in the greenhouse and the landscapes as best I can. And, if I, just sort of plaster my studio walls with that kind of stuff. And sometimes that influence will seep into the work that week, and sometimes it'll seep into the work 5 years later.
Excellent. And, I think that, what is sort of being echoed here in a lot of the comments is just how informative, interesting, and beautiful these presentations have been. And I think one thing that I want everyone in the audience, to take away from all of these sort of comments and all of these questions that we've had here, and also the questions that you all have had for each other, and the way you've answered the questions is really to think about the power of what you do, and the ability to the ability of your all's individualized visions to be translated into some sort of object or sort of two-dimensional work that can have a really profound effect on everyone that's around us, right? There's a quote from an author I quite like. I can't remember the name at the moment, but sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will break our hearts, and images and the objects we make have the power to express and to help others express and to help others understand how it is and who it is we are, and how it is and how we navigate the world. So I want to thank all of you this evening for giving all of us and all of the audience here tonight the privilege to listen to you, to see your work. And on behalf of the Arts Council of Princeton, thank you so much for giving of your time and giving of your art. And audience, thank you tonight for joining us. We are so happy and honored that you spent this Wednesday evening with us. It's time to go to bed. Sleep tight. Have a great day. Thank you.